In July 1099, Muslim control of Jerusalem came to a violent end when the city fell to the Crusader armies. In the 3 days following its capture, the Crusaders carried out a horrific massacre, slaughtering nearly 70,000 Muslims and Jews and desecrating their sacred sites. After this conquest, the Crusaders established the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem, a Christian Crusader state. With Jerusalem now in Christian hands, pilgrimages to the city surged dramatically, drawing Christians from across Europe to the Holy Land. By 1118, a French knight named Hugues de Payens, along with 8 fellow knights, approached King Baldwin II of Jerusalem, seeking permission to form a religious order dedicated to protecting Christian pilgrims traveling through these dangerous lands. They became known as the Poor Soldiers of Jesus and the Temple of Solomon. But history remembers them by the name they became famous for, the Knights Templar. King Baldwin granted their request and allowed them to establish their headquarters on the Temple Mount, a site long associated with the ruins of Solomon's Temple. Within a remarkably short time, this order grew in numbers and transformed from poverty-stricken monks into one of the wealthiest and most powerful organizations of their age, eventually gaining official recognition from the Church. The Knights Templar were notorious for their ruthlessness toward Muslims, taking part in some of the most brutal massacres of the Crusades. Their decision to establish their base on the Temple Mount, the site of the biblical Temple of Solomon described in the Old Testament, was no coincidence. While they claimed their mission was to guard the roads to Jerusalem and protect Christian pilgrims, this was merely a cover. Their true objective was the treasure, relics, and artifacts rumored to be hidden beneath the ruins of the temple. The Templars began secretly excavating tunnels beneath the Temple Mount. In time, they found what they were searching for: a collection of ancient manuscripts and scrolls. This collection would later become associated with what we now know as the Kabbalah. Prophet Solomon, peace be upon him, was granted a unique power by Allah: the ability to summon and control the jinn. By Allah's command, he placed many of these jinn under his service, assigning them to monumental tasks, including the construction of the Great Temple. After Prophet Solomon's death, however, the devils spread corruption among the people. They wrote false scriptures and books of magic, hiding them beneath Solomon's throne. They then deceived the people into believing that Solomon had ruled over the jinn through sorcery. Many began practicing this forbidden magic and even accused Prophet Solomon of teaching it. In the Quran, Allah Almighty refuted this falsehood and defended his prophet, declaring that it was not Solomon who practiced magic, but rather the devils who taught it to the people. Centuries later, these very manuscripts were what the Knights Templar sought beneath the ruins of Solomon's temple. Their discovery of such writings became intertwined with the early origins of Jewish mystical traditions, later known as Kabbalah. Kabbalah is a Hebrew word that literally means receiving or tradition received. It is not the work of a single author, but rather a body of mystical teachings compiled and modified by various writers over different periods. According to Jewish belief, Kabbalah represents the esoteric knowledge that was revealed to Prophet Moses, peace be upon him, at Mount Sinai, and was then passed down secretly through select Jewish scholars and mystics across generations. However, this claim is just vague. In reality, Kabbalah is an esoteric and occult tradition. While some parts may appear as spiritual or symbolic wisdom, much of it delves into hidden and dangerous territory. A reader often cannot distinguish between what is harmless and what is dark, making it a path fraught with risks. The first known Kabbalistic text to be published was the Sefer HaBahir, Book of Brightness, around 1176, during the same period as the rise of the Knights Templar. In the 13th century, the most famous and influential Kabbalistic work, the Zohar, Book of Splendor, emerged, providing a comprehensive mystical commentary on the Torah. The modern form of Kabbalah, known as Lurianic Kabbalah, was developed in the 16th century by Rabbi Isaac Luria during the era of the Ottoman Empire. At the same time Kabbalah was spreading widely, strange and unsettling events were being reported. In the late 1500s, during the reign of Emperor Rudolf of the Holy Roman Empire, the Jewish community in Prague lived under constant threat. Anti-Semitic attacks, accusations like the infamous blood libel, which accused Jews of using Christian blood for rituals, and persecution were rampant. The leader of Prague's Jewish community was Rabbi Judah Loew, also known as the Maharal of Prague, a deeply respected scholar, mystic, and Kabbalist. According to legend, Rabbi Loew had a dream in which the heavens instructed him to create a protector for the Jewish people, a golem, a humanoid figure made of clay and animated through sacred Kabbalistic rituals. The idea of creating life was inspired by the mystical teachings of the Sefer Yetzirah, Book of Creation, an ancient Kabbalistic text that described how God created the universe through the manipulation of Hebrew letters and divine formulas. According to Kabbalistic tradition, the world was brought into being through 10 divine utterances. Each being in existence, they say, is the result of a unique combination of these supernal letters, each letter a channel of divine creative energy. By understanding and rearranging these sacred combinations, one could tap into the same cosmic forces used in the act of creation. This mystical principle was used to create Golem. Legend says on a dark night, Rabbi Loew went with his most trusted disciples to the banks of the Vltava River in Prague. From the riverbank, they gathered clay and shaped it into a giant humanoid figure, approximately 7 to 8 feet tall. Once the clay figure was formed, Rabbi Loew performed Kabbalistic rituals, reciting prayers and combinations of Hebrew letters associated with the Shem HaMeforash, the explicit name of God. Finally, he inscribed the word Emet, meaning truth, onto the golem's forehead and placed a parchment with God's name inside its mouth. With this, the clay figure came to life. Its eyes opened and it stood up, animated, a silent, obedient servant. The golem had incredible strength but could not speak. Under Rabbi Loew's command, it patrolled the Jewish quarter, scaring away attackers and protecting against anti-Semitic violence. Some versions say it also carried out tasks for the community, such as heavy labor, cleaning, and even rescuing children. Most famously, it is said to have thwarted a blood libel plot. When a Christian tried to plant a dead child's body in the Jewish quarter to frame the Jews, the golem discovered and exposed the plan, saving the entire community from massacre. Over time, the golem became a feared figure, striking terror into anyone who tried to harm the Jews of Prague. However, as the golem continued to serve, its power grew dangerously uncontrollable. In some versions of the tale, Rabbi Loew forgot to deactivate it on the Sabbath, and the creature went on a rampage, damaging property and terrifying even those it was meant to protect. Realizing the danger, Rabbi Loew decided to deactivate the golem. He approached it and erased the first letter of the word Emet from its forehead, leaving Met, meaning death. The golem immediately collapsed back into lifeless clay. Rabbi Loew ordered the clay remains to be stored in the attic of the old New Synagogue, Altneuschel, in Prague, where legend claims it remains to this day. This is not all. The Talmud itself records several accounts of sages creating animals and even humans through the mystical knowledge of the Sefer Yetzirah, an early Kabbalistic work that explores the divine secrets of creation and the power of harnessing the sacred Hebrew letters used by God to form the universe. One striking account describes how the sage Rava once created a man through the mystical knowledge of Sefer Yetzirah. He sent this being to his colleague, Rabbi Zira. When Rabbi Zira attempted to converse with the man, he received no reply. Realizing its nature, Rabbi Zira said, "You are one of those formed by the sages. Return to the dust." Instantly, the being disintegrated. Another account relates that 2 rabbis would gather every Friday evening before the Sabbath and study Sefer Yetzirah together. Their learning would cause fat calves to be created, which they would then proceed to eat. These events are a classic example of practical Kabbalah, where rituals and mystical practices are used to produce real-world effects, venturing into the realm of magic. Central to practical Kabbalah is the concept of the Shem HaMeforash, the explicit name of God, derived from hidden combinations of Hebrew letters. In Jewish mystical texts, even angels are bound by these names. A properly prepared practitioner, they claimed, could command spirits, banish evil forces, or even reshape matter. But such acts came at a cost. One misplaced syllable or wrong intention was said to invite forces from the other side, which we talk about later. One of the most infamous texts tied to this tradition is the Sefer Harazim, or Book of Mysteries. Its pages describe rituals for summoning otherworldly beings, calling down celestial armies, and even speaking to spirits that dwell between worlds. It describes concentric heavens and instructions to access their power through sacrifices of incense, chanting formulas, and drawing intricate seals under the right planetary alignments. Some accounts say these rites blurred dangerously into the realm of demonology. By the Middle Ages, a secretive class of mystics emerged, the Baalei Shem, or Masters of the Name. These were wandering rabbis and healers who claimed the power to heal the sick, ward off curses, and banish spirits. To the common people, they were saviors. To their critics, they were magicians skirting dangerously close to forbidden territory. Practical Kabbalah was not infallible. Several accounts tell of rabbis who overstepped their bounds and paid the price. One 15th century mystic, Joseph della Reina, believed he could hasten redemption itself. Convinced he could bring about the coming of the Messiah, Joseph sought to summon and bind Satan himself, compelling the embodiment of evil to submit. He retreated into the wilderness with a small group of disciples. Night after night, they drew circles, burned incense, and chanted the hidden names until something finally answered. According to the accounts, Satan appeared. When Joseph tried to bind him with holy names, it failed. Some say his pride corrupted his ritual. Others claim Satan simply outwitted him. In despair, Joseph turned to darker invocations, offering incense to forbidden spirits in exchange for help. Within days, his sanity broke. He wandered the hills alone until he vanished. Kabbalistic texts record his fate. Joseph della Reina descended into the hands of the other side and was never seen again. After hearing this, who can deny that Kabbalah is a form of magic? It is magic in the language of signs and symbols, a technology of the unseen world. Circles, squares, the Star of David, the all-seeing eye, the right hand marked with an eye at its center, the serpent coiled upon itself, and Metatron's cube. Each shape is said to be a gateway, a channel for forces that most would call forbidden. These symbols are not ornamental. They are mechanisms. Combined with numerology, the mystical science of numbers, they become tools for bending reality. In this, Kabbalah shares unsettling parallels with one of the most infamous grimoires in Islamic tradition, Shams al-Ma'arif, a book condemned for its explicit instructions on summoning and commanding jinn. Both employ geometry, hidden names, and coded diagrams to establish contact with entities outside the visible world. This is not angelic work. These rituals don't summon divine beings. They summon devils, In fact, Kabbalah doesn't shy away from this dark connection. It openly speaks of a realm known as the other side, a dimension associated with pure evil. Most people who hear about Kabbalah think of the Tree of Life, a sacred diagram of 10 sephirot representing divine attributes, a spiritual map leading upward toward God. This concept highly resembles Sufism in Islam. For centuries, Kabbalists claimed the tree encoded the formula of creation itself, the very structure by which existence came into being. Each sphere was said to be a living gate, governed by angelic forces and powered by divine names. If ascended correctly through intense meditation, one could allegedly achieve states of consciousness bordering on the superhuman. Visions of celestial realms, contact with spiritual entities, even the ability to manipulate physical events. However, to oppose the Tree of Life is the other side. In Kabbalistic mysticism, the Sitra Achra, literally the other side, represents the shadow world mirroring divine order. For every sephira on the Tree of Life, there exists its inversion within this forbidden domain, forming what later occultists called the Tree of Death. Unlike the orderly Tree of Life, the other side is chaos. Here dwell the Kulaphoth, husks, or shells. The Zohar itself warns, "He who gazes into the husks will be consumed by their gaze." Stories across medieval Europe tell of mystics who attempted to traverse this realm during ecstatic trances. One account from 15th century Spain describes a mystic known as Abraham of Granada, who pursued forbidden rituals to summon knowledge from the husks. Witnesses reported strange sounds emanating from his chamber, howling wind, footsteps on the ceiling. On the third night, he was found unconscious, his skin covered in geometric burns resembling the inverted Tree of Life. He survived but never spoke coherently again, repeating only one phrase: "It watches back." By the 19th and early 20th centuries, the Kulaphoth became a fascination for occultists. Among them was Alister Crowley, whose writings openly referenced descending the husks to confront and control these chaotic intelligences. Crowley and his followers in the Ordo Templi Orientis, OTO, conducted rituals involving sexual rites, bloodletting, and the recitation of corrupted divine names. He claimed these practices could tear the veil and open gateways to what he described as pre-human intelligences, forces indifferent, alien, and overwhelmingly predatory. One OTO member's journal describes a ritual in Cairo in 1904. At the 9th hour, shadows gathered against the wall, though no light cast them. The air thickened. A voice, not spoken, but pressed against the skull, said, "You opened it. Now feed it." These dark interpretations didn't fade. Instead, they resurfaced in modern esotericism, woven into occult movements. The rise of Kulaphotic magic in the late 20th century coincided with renewed interest in symbols of inversion. Upside-down trees, black sephirot diagrams, and sigils invoking entities long described as husks.
Alister Crowley, often called the wickedest man in the world, immersed himself in Jewish Kabbalah, Hermeticism, and esoteric traditions. But unlike other mystics, he weaponized them. Crowley saw it as a blueprint for breaking the boundaries. Crowley's obsession with Kabbalah reached a turning point in 1904 during his infamous trip to Cairo, Egypt. He and his wife, Rose, engaged in ritual after ritual, drawing from a hybrid of Kabbalistic invocations and ancient Egyptian spells. According to Crowley, Rose entered a trance-like state in which she claimed to see Horus, the Egyptian god of war, staring at her from an unseen dimension. On April 10th, Crowley claimed that an unseen intelligence named Iwas dictated to him the Book of the Law. He declared it the foundation of his religion, Thelema, centered on the phrase, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." Crowley later analyzed the text using gematria, a Kabbalistic numerology system that assigns numbers to Hebrew letters. He argued the book concealed codes tied to the Tree of Life, and that Aiwass was a minister of Harpocrates, blending Egyptian deities with Kabbalistic angelic hierarchies. He returned to Europe and began conducting what he called sexual magic, rituals combining intimacy and sacred geometry, believing they could tear open the barriers between worlds. He integrated Kabbalistic sigils directly into these acts, claiming they transformed physical pleasure into an energetic beacon powerful enough to summon entities. Some of his followers reported terrifying visions during these rites, shadowy figures watching from the periphery, rooms filling with inexplicable cold, disembodied voices whispering in ancient tongues. In one account from a 1911 ritual in Paris, Crowley allegedly used a fusion of Kabbalistic magic and Egyptian invocations to call forth an astral intelligence. Witnesses later described how Crowley became rigid, his voice changing tone entirely, speaking a language none of them understood. Hours later, he collapsed, drenched in sweat, and claimed that he had crossed the abyss and entered direct communion with what he described as a qliphothic intelligence. His excursions weren't confined to controlled settings either. In Sicily, at his infamous Abbey of Thelema, Crowley staged unrestrained experiments that combined Kabbalistic diagrams painted onto walls with ritual intoxication and ceremonial invocations. Villagers whispered of strange lights emanating from the abbey at night, and visitors reported feeling watched by unseen presences even outside its doors. One disciple, Raoul Loveday, died after participating in one such rite involving the ingestion of a ritual drink Crowley claimed would unbind the soul. Crowley himself admitted that not all his experiments were successful or safe. In his own writings, he detailed how during one ritual of practical Kabbalah, intended to invoke a spirit tied to the qliphothic realm of obstruction and confusion, he lost control of the ritual entirely. He described objects flying across the room, his vision fracturing into kaleidoscopic patterns, and a formless presence pressing upon his mind so heavily that he nearly blacked out. He later wrote chillingly, "I had the sense that the floor beneath me had dissolved and that I was falling, not through space, but through the very fabric of existence, into something that was not meant to be seen." Whether all the stories about Alister Crowley are true or not, one thing is clear: he was a deeply dark and disturbing figure. He used Kabbalah primarily for occult rituals rooted in darkness. Crowley is known to have communicated with jinn, and in return, he offered up his soul. To gain the favor of these devils, he orchestrated horrifying and twisted rituals, because that's what real magic often demands.
Throughout this video, you've heard the word Zohar mentioned several times. Now let's take a look at what it actually is. Within Jewish mysticism, it is said that the Torah is not read, it is decoded. Beneath its surface lies a labyrinth of meanings that can be understood through 4 progressively deeper levels of interpretation. Known as Pardes, this system has been central to both mainstream Jewish thought and the esoteric traditions of Kabbalah. The term Pardes itself is an acronym derived from 4 Hebrew words: Peshat, Remez, Dirash, and Sod. The first level is Peshat, which means plain or simple. It is the literal meaning of the text, the historical narrative, laws, and moral instructions. The second level, Remez, translates to hint or allusion. Here, the Torah is read for its symbolic and allegorical meaning, where words and phrases carry hidden references to celestial forces, archetypes, and cosmic laws. The third level, Dirash, is interpretation or inquiry. It uses midrashic methods, stories, parables, and deep analysis, to extract moral, legal, and mystical lessons that are not obvious in the text itself. The deepest level is Sod, meaning secret or mystery. This is where the Torah becomes a map of creation, the human soul, and the unseen worlds. At this level, words are treated like keys, letters like gateways, and numbers like formulas. The four levels together form Pardes, meaning orchard or garden, symbolizing a paradise of infinite knowledge. But in Kabbalistic warnings, entering this garden comes with peril. Talmudic tradition tells of 4 rabbis who entered Pardes. One went mad, one died, one became a heretic and cut down the shoots, a cryptic phrase suggesting forbidden knowledge. Only one, Rabbi Akiva, entered in peace and left in peace. Kabbalists see this as proof that delving into Sod, the deepest secrets, is a dangerous act, potentially exposing the seeker to the other side, the dark inversions of divine truth known as the Qliphoth. The most foundational work of Kabbalah is the Zohar. The Zohar is the central text of Kabbalah, and it means splendor. Unlike simple readings of the Torah, the Zohar moves seamlessly through the levels of Pardes. According to the Zohar, every human carries spiritual imprints upon their body, lines on the forehead, features of the face, and markings on the hands, all of which reflect their soul's history, moral standing, and purpose. Those who master this wisdom can see a person's essence without words. Zohar's physiognomy teaches that the face is like an open book, revealing a person's inner qualities. It describes how sages could discern traits such as wisdom, deceit, humility, anger, or compassion simply by observing facial structure and expression. The forehead, in particular, is said to bear spiritual letters, marks seen not with ordinary sight but with mystical perception. A tale involves a Kabbalist in medieval Spain who traveled from village to village reading faces to resolve disputes. In one case, 2 merchants accused each other of theft. The Kabbalist studied their foreheads and declared one of them guilty. When pressed for proof, he explained that the man's forehead bore letters of shadow that revealed deceit. In addition to the face, the Zohar devotes significant attention to the hands, teaching that their lines and shapes are like a map. Each finger corresponds to a spiritual force, and the main lines, what later traditions call the lifeline, wisdom line, and fate line, reflect vitality, intellect, and destiny. Unlike later popular palmistry, the Zohar connects these lines directly to Hebrew letters and cosmic principles. One passage tells of a sage who examined a young man's hands and foresaw danger in his path. He noticed a broken line that intersected sharply with another, which, he explained, indicated a great trial ahead. The sage instructed the young man to give charity and study Torah intensively. Months later, the man narrowly survived a violent attack on the road, convinced that the warning and prescribed deeds had saved his life. A similar event is recorded in Islamic history, when Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was around 12 years old. He traveled to Syria with his uncle Abu Talib. There, they met a monk named Bahira. When Bahira saw the young prophet, he looked closely at his face, asked him questions, and somehow knew details about him, like the fact that his father had passed away. Bahira also recognized that this child was the final prophet mentioned in earlier scriptures. He warned Abu Talib that if the Jews saw him, they would recognize him too, so he should take him back to Mecca quickly. It's possible that Bahira had some kind of mystical knowledge, maybe similar to the face reading mentioned in the Zohar, which helped him recognize who the prophet really was. So, Kabbalah, at least in its darkest form, traces its roots back to ancient texts believed to have been written by devils themselves. These forbidden writings were said to be hidden beneath the ruins of the Temple of Solomon. Centuries later, the Knights Templar allegedly uncovered these texts during the Crusades, and what followed was the rebirth of one of the darkest magical systems in history. As for the fate of the Knights Templar, when the great Muslim leader Salahuddin Ayyubi, Saladin, reclaimed Jerusalem from the Crusaders in 1187, he pardoned nearly all the Christians, except the Knights Templar, whose notorious brutality and enmity left no room for forgiveness. The Templars were slaughtered, but some managed to flee Jerusalem. Despite their defeat in the Holy Land, the Templars survived in Europe, where they re-established themselves. Over time, they amassed such power, wealth, and influence, particularly in France, that they became a state within a state, provoking fear and hostility among kings and rulers across the continent. The Knights Templar were known for performing secretive rituals, many of which were rumored to be dark and malicious. In 1307, under the orders of King Philip of France and with the support of Pope Clement, the order was officially banned and its members arrested. While a few Templars managed to escape, the majority were captured and subjected to brutal interrogations and lengthy trials. Under torture, many Templars confessed to shocking accusations. They admitted that during their initiation rites, they were forced to deny Christ, spit upon or trample the crucifix, and engage in acts designed to test their obedience. They were accused of heresy, sorcery, idolatry, and even homosexual acts. Some also revealed that the order possessed secret teachings and hidden knowledge. The power of the Knights Templar was shattered, but some of its members managed to escape. A number of them fled France and found refuge in Scotland, under the protection of King Robert the Bruce, the only monarch in Europe beyond the authority and influence of the Pope. There, Templars reorganized and rebuilt their ranks in secrecy. To conceal their identity and continue their operations, they adopted a new strategy. They infiltrated the powerful guilds of skilled stonemasons, one of the most prominent civil organizations in Britain at the time. Gradually, they gained control over these organizations, reshaping them into what would later become known as the Freemasonry Lodge, ensuring their survival under a new name. In their book, The Hiram Key, British Freemason authors Christopher Knight and Robert Lomas argue that the origins of Freemasonry can be directly traced back to the Knights Templar. They contend that the Templars' true purpose was never simply to protect pilgrims, but rather to excavate the site of Solomon's temple, and their efforts were far from in vain. What I am emphasizing is this: the Knights Templar uncovered the mystical teachings and writings later known as the Jewish Kabbalah, which became the source of their immense wealth, influence, and power. They were the first bankers of Europe and wielded extraordinary political authority. Over time, the esoteric knowledge they unearthed formed the foundation of secretive groups like Freemasonry, all of which trace their origins back to this hidden mystical tradition of Kabbalah.